This works pretty simply. You sit down and you interview people. The way that I find that this works really well, so what this is an actual interview happening, is you've got one person on the red couch there, that's the person being interviewed, and you've got two people conducting the interview. One person here on the right is asking the questions, the person in the middle is taking notes. And the person taking notes isn't just taking notes about what the other person says, they're taking notes about what they're intuiting. They're connecting with that person being interviewed. So if that person feels something like, oh, this is a little bit weird, or what was that reaction, or wow, I'm feeling really excited in this moment, or I sense dread at this part of the interview, take those in the notes. Also take notes on the person doing the interview, because hopefully you're not doing just one of these, you're gonna do 40, 50, 100 of these, and you wanna get better with each interview. So that's why it's really important to have two people. Doing these interviews is super hard if you're doing it alone. If you get really good at it and you've done a lot of interviews, then you can kind of go it alone and take notes, conduct the interview, sort of get into this Zen moment, but it's really, really hard. So when you first start this out, make sure you're doing two people interviewing one person. Now often when I help companies with this, I'll say, okay, now go out and do 20, 30, 40 interviews. And usually a clever entrepreneur will say, cool, well I'm gonna put 40 people in the room, or I'm gonna send out a survey to 40 people, and that gets me my 40. The rule of thumb here is always interview one other person, and the ideal situation is when you can see the other person's pupils dilate. That's when you know you're in an environment that's conducive to a really good interview. Well, why is that? Because our bodies are picking up on the bodily reactions, not just what they're saying. So doing these over the phone, really bad, because you can't get that sense of what's going on. Doing interviews over email, completely useless. Doing interviews where there's 10 or 20 people in the room with you, also, in my opinion, completely useless. Because what happens there, like a focus group, let's say you've got 10 people in the room, usually within about 30 to 90 seconds, the most vocal person in the room will bias everybody else. And so what'll start happening is you're hearing 7, 8 people agree with what you're saying, or they're all agreeing with each other, and you think, wow, these 7 people are really having the same problem. The reality is there's probably one person that's vocal, may or may not even have the problem, and the other 6, 7 people are just joining in. So that's why focus groups are so dangerous to do at the early stage. Later stage, as you're testing, fine-tuning go-to-market, there's chances there that they work okay. But early stage, please don't do focus groups. Please don't send out email surveys. Please don't send out other type of 5, 10-second click surveys. Take the time, 20, 30 minutes to sit down with a potential customer and really understand their world. Now once you are getting ready for those, I've got a worksheet here called the Empathy Interview Planner, and this will help you prepare for these empathy interviews. We're gonna take a little bit of time here in a minute and practice some of this. So we'll get some hands-on with this, but I wanna give you a real quick tour of it. In the upper left-hand corner, talk about your intention. What are you trying to learn? Why are you doing this? Next box is reaching your users or customers. Where are you gonna find them? What are you gonna say to them to try to get them to schedule an interview? A pro tip here is if you're really struggling to find people to even interview, that's a really good sign you're not onto something. Because you can't even get them to spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes with you, how are you ever gonna convince them to buy your product? So that's the first sign whether or not even your intention is sort of aimed in a spot that the market cares about. Then we think about themes, possible themes that you wanna learn more about, and then your interview questions. So pull from those themes, asking 1 or 2 open-ended, genuinely curious questions about the themes that you want to explore. And then on the right-hand side of this guide, or of the worksheet, is a guide that gives you some insights into how to ask effective questions, how to conduct these interviews in a way that maximize the data that comes back from the people you're interviewing. So we'll dive into this here in a minute, pretty hands-on. Because we're doing multiple of these interviews, the key is we want to be able to step back and start to see patterns. We've got this raw data from the interviews that when you do these, transcribe almost, maybe not word for word like a medical transcription, but transcribe thematically pretty accurately what the other person says. And so when you get done with 40, 50, 100 of these interviews, you're going to have a lot of transcripts. So the empathy map is a way to stand back and say, okay, given everything that we learned from all these interviews, what are the patterns that are showing up? And the specific patterns we want to focus on in the middle are, what did the people say? What stood out to you that people said, don't think just about things that you heard over and over again. Also note outliers here. Outlier comments can be really powerful. So what did they say in the interview? What did you infer that they were thinking? Or maybe they were actually talking about the thoughts that they were having. If you're watching people do, in a work situation, so let's say your business involves certain activities, go visit your prospects, watch them do those activities, and do is where they either talk about what they did or you actually observing what they're doing. There's a piece of this which is, there's kind of a joke in knowledge management, which is we only know what we know in the moment when we need to know it. So if you ask somebody what they know, you'll get pretty crappy answers. If you watch them do something and have them sort of articulate or sort of talk to themselves about what they're thinking about, how they're approaching it, then you'll really get the knowledge that they have. So that's a trick if you're out in the field doing ethnographic type research where you're watching people work. And then the final box here is feel. So if you feel something in these interviews, or if the person describes their emotions in the situations that you're having them describe, note those there. Also note outliers as well as common patterns. So the center part there is where you're really pulling directly from the transcripts. Then on the edges, you're trying to infer what's going on around that direct lived experience. So there you're synthesizing out, okay, of the feelings, of the thoughts, of the actions, what represents tensions and anxieties? What makes them nervous? What's sort of keeping them stuck in the status quo? Because most new products, most new startups, your biggest competition is not the other 12 startups doing what you're sort of vaguely doing. The biggest competition is the status quo, the entrenched beliefs of your customers. And those generally show up as tensions and anxieties where they don't want to move away from the status quo. So note those there. Motivations. What's motivating them to take on a different way? So this is what's compelling them to get off the status quo and think about there's got to be a better way to solve this problem that I'm having or improve my experience. And then finally note the situations that these people are in as they're describing their lived experience. And we'll get back to the situation, why that's important here in a little bit. Then once you do this, stand back from it. I've done these where there's like 400 or 500 sticky notes on this huge mural on the wall. And the sticky notes represent direct quotes from the interviews. And then we stand back from it and we look for patterns. We say, okay, where's the signal? Where are the outliers here? Where are we getting insights? Where are we getting data that blends up with our insights, that give us a way of looking at the customer, at the prospect in a way that we maybe have never thought about before?